Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, August 8th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Kamala Harris taking a massive 8-point lead over former President Donald Trump in a brand new A-plus poll from Marquette University. They release polls very infrequently, and they gauge a general trend over the course of a week. They're an A-plus rated pollster, one of the best that we've seen across the country, and they have finally released their first ever rendition of a Harris versus Trump versus Kennedy poll that shows Kamala Harris with an 8-point advantage. They also decided to do a set of polls that pushed voters into a binary option between Vice President Harris and former President Trump, in which Kamala Harris takes a 6-point lead in a head-to-head poll, yet again continuing the point that RFK Jr. is now only hurting Donald Trump rather than the Democrats. Now, this 8-point lead is something that is completely out of left field. I mean, we never saw any polls over the past 6 months showing Donald Trump with an 8-point lead, and now that Kamala Harris is starting to take an advantage point, this continues to show that the momentum is not only maintaining itself, but growing in favor of the Democratic Party. On the national head-to-head, we see that against Donald Trump, Kamala Harris leads by roughly 2 points. This is a three-way race against Trump and Kennedy, and she maintains a 2-point advantage. When she first started out in the race, she was only ahead by less than a point, and it actually started to narrow in the immediate aftermath of her announcement. At one point in time, Donald Trump was down just 0.2%. But Kamala Harris has since expanded that lead to 2.1% and growing. By the time we reach the election, it's very possible that she's up 3, 4, 5 points nationally. And that's good news for the Democratic Party. Because Kamala Harris has been at a point where up until the nomination of her, many people were wondering, does she have what it takes and does she have the electability to win this election? Well, it seems to be clear that voters seem to think so, as she now leads Donald Trump by the largest margin that either side of the aisle has seen in a national poll in months. And so this advantage that Kamala Harris has really stands in direct contrast with the Republican talking point that Kamala Harris is too far left to win in this nation, that Kamala Harris is too left-wing to do well on the electoral level. When in reality, what we are seeing here is that Kamala Harris is not only doing well, but continuing to do even better. Another point of interest I think we can see is the general election data between Trump versus Biden. I bring this up a lot because the growth that we've seen for the Democratic Party since Biden left the race has been quite substantive. When Donald Trump defeated Joe Biden at that first debate, according to all of the polls, we saw that leading up to the announcement, Joe Biden's numbers started to drop. He started to lose support after that debate. The debate happened on June 26th, 27th, I believe, or sometime around there at the end of June, and then immediately, in the aftermath of it, Donald Trump was up 1.5%. Joe Biden saw a tremendous dip nationwide, going down to his lowest point in months. And so now Kamala Harris has been working to try to rebuild that. Joe Biden was clawing his way up, but it wasn't working. Donald Trump started to do better. Donald Trump started to gain even more support, more momentum. And, after the assassination attempt and the J.D. Vance announcement and the RNC, while there may have been some missteps along the way, Donald Trump has certainly, at that point in time, was on track for a victory. And that's why in my final prediction, before Joe Biden dropped out of the race, I had Donald Trump at 312 electoral votes and Joe Biden at 226, the worst performing Democratic performance of the 21st century. And so Democrats certainly made the right decision in swapping out Vice President Harris. And what do we find is that she not only is doing well, but doing significantly better. And Marquette University, again, is an A-plus rated pollster. I mean, they don't take these polls lightly, and they are tremendously accurate in terms of how accurate they are. Their track record is quite strong. They released a new data point that shows Kamala Harris winning a point in the state of Wisconsin. That actually tracks with some of our historical polling data and understanding about the election process. For instance, back in 2020, Joe Biden did win Wisconsin by a point, but was up nationally by 7-8 points on Election Day in head-to-head polls. That's where you see good news coming in for the Democratic Party, because it means we're starting to get back to a point that's building out a very similar 2020 coalition. And while she may not be vastly outperforming Biden by every metric, she certainly is in 90% of them, that still builds out good news because of the fact she's up 8 points nationally, and I can actually show you what an 8-point national victory will look like if we were to translate it to an electoral map. And so I want you to show you this Marquette University poll. I want you to see exactly what this 8-point lead is actually visualized as. The last point here on Biden is that if you take a look, but the last time Marquette University did a poll, they were running roughly even with what the national average was saying. They released a poll back in March that showed, pretty much Joe Biden not in the best point against Donald Trump, but tied roughly even. And, that actually made sense. We saw that Reuters also had a tie. Morning Consult had Trump up by 1. I had Biden up by 2. ABC News had Biden up by 1. And so it was really fluctuating at this point. And this was around the time that the Democratic campaign and Joe Biden was calling out Donald Trump for a debate, asking him to do debate anytime, any place. And so Joe Biden was really going on the offense here, and his numbers were actually starting to do far better than what people were expecting, and what we actually saw in comparison to July, phenomenally better than then. And so then you see that Marquette University had Joe Biden and Donald Trump in a tie, largely running even with what the national average is saying. Now they have Kamala Harris up by 8. And so again, this is an A+ rated pollster, a very, very strong poll here, and one that I think can really start to show exactly how this nation is changing. I don't think Kamala Harris will win this election by 8 points nationally. I do not think that is going to happen. But what I do think is that it is indicative of what we have seen over the past 3 weeks consistently without fail, and that is consistency and maintained momentum for Vice President Harris over former President Donald Trump. Now let's get to the point about what an 8-point victory actually looks like in an election like 2024. So on your screen right now is actually not an 8-point electoral, 8-point victory nationwide. This is my most recent election prediction with Tim Walz on the ticket with Vice President Harris and, of course, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. So what do we see here? Kamala Harris already at a strong point, 276 to Donald Trump's 262, but it would be a pretty narrow victory. If it was to be rated on the scale of Democratic victories in the 21st century, it would be the worst Democratic victory. But a victory is still a victory, and 4 years is still 4 years. Now, Kamala Harris at 276. An 8-point victory would get her well beyond 276. And so let's go ahead and use the 2020 electoral map as a point of reference in what a 2024 map might look like, with a victory of being up nationally by 8 points in this three-way race. So let's go ahead and take a look. None of the safe blue states would change, and for the majority of the safe red states, they really wouldn't see any type of significant narrowing. South Carolina would be likely, Alaska would be likely, Montana would be likely. Keep in mind, Joe Biden won nationally by 4.5%, so this is not, again, a perfect science, just a general understanding of how substantive an 8-point victory would be nationwide. We would see Missouri narrow down slightly, Indiana narrow down slightly, Mississippi narrow down slightly, Kansas, Nebraska's 1st district. I know we're starting to get to a lot here, but that's where we were, and that's where we are. And we're looking at a shift that is pretty universal across the map here. And so what it would also mean is states like Colorado become safe blue. States like New Mexico would become even more Democratic. Virginia would become even more Democratic. New Hampshire, even more Democratic. It would make Michigan a likely blue state. It would keep Pennsylvania and Wisconsin as lean blue states, but it would mean that Democrats are now winning in states like Georgia by a lean margin. They're now winning in states like Arizona by a lean margin. And believe it or not, it actually means that Nevada becomes a likely blue state. It means Nebraska's second maintains itself, Maine at large maintains itself. And so again, what we are finding here is that Georgia's blue, Arizona's blue again. We're finding also too that North Carolina goes from being a Republican state to a narrow Democratic state. That's good news for Democrats. And the worst news, I think, of all, in a circumstance like this one, that would really shock many people when you're looking at a shift that would be nationally a 3.5% shift, going from 4.5% to 8 points. That would be a 3.5% shift. It would actually narrowly flip the state of Florida. And I know that's really, really shocking because no one really expects that, right? Ohio, Iowa would narrow down compared to what they were. But, what we're finding is that, and I keep saying that, I'm sorry about that, but Florida would become a Democratic state under that circumstance. I certainly don't think Florida will be going blue. I don't think that's where we are today. But this, again, is a map assuming an 8-point national victory is reflective of what we saw in 2020. In reality, I think a map more like this is going to be the reality, even with an 8-point victory. Okay, maybe Florida going down to being a lean red state. Beyond that, though, this is where I think an 8-point map realistically would actually get us to. Locking down the Rust Belt, locking down the Sun Belt, flipping North Carolina, a 319 electoral vote victory to Donald Trump's 219. That is what 8 points translates to. And it's really good news for the Democratic Party that they're starting to see data points from high, I cannot express this enough, high quality pollsters that give us a general understanding of where our elections are today, because it is phenomenal news for Vice President Harris when we see data points like this, because it means that the tides are undoubtedly changing. We never once saw, in the duration of this candidacy, Joe Biden ahead by 8 points nationally, with very limited exceptions of him even being in the advantage and the driving seat by some substantial amounts. For instance, Quinnipiac University had Biden up by 6. That was probably his best performing poll we had seen of the cycle, because every other time it was either Trump was leading by significant amounts, 6 points or less. And the only other time, too, where we saw Donald Trump doing quite well was when Marquette University released, not Marquette University, ABC News Washington Post released a poll showing Trump ahead by 10 points nationally. And that was the best piece of news that the Trump campaign could have seen. And then Biden started to rebound. Then things started to get different. Trump started to lead again. Biden saw infrequent leads, started to narrow it up, but Trump was still maintaining an advantage. And now when you take a look at the snapshot of the final polls taken before Biden dropped down, it is like night and day when compared to what we are seeing for Vice President Harris. Because the latest and the oldest polls show Trump with the lead, and the most recent ones show Kamala Harris in the driver's seat. That is still, no matter how you cut it, good news for the Democratic Party, and a map of victory like this one Democrats would be ecstatic to have this coming November. This would be a significant victory for Kamala Harris, and I'm sure that the campaign knows it. Now, Democrats, I don't think, are at any point to be complacent with where they are in this election. And I think that is something that I have reiterated multiple times. Even back in 2020, when the numbers looked far better than they do today for Joe Biden, we knew that race was going to be close. We knew that Biden wasn't actually winning Wisconsin by 17 points like the final 17-point poll had shown from ABC News. We knew that was not going to be our reality. Was it an indicator that Biden had shifted significant masses and, minds in terms of who was voting? In a way, yes. But it was never going to be a 17-point victory. In the same way, it's never going to be an 8-point victory for Kamala Harris. But a victory very well may come. And a victory very well, in my opinion, is now starting to become more likely than not. When under President Biden, it was far, far, far-fetched out of reality, given where he was in the polls, given where he was in national head-to-heads. And even the betting odds are starting to change here. I think that's what's also really struck me as quite significant. Joe Biden had only maintained narrow advantages after the State of the Union, and after a slight bump in national polls, he was seeing a narrow advantage over Donald Trump. And while Kamala Harris's advantage isn't anything more than narrow, it still goes to show that where she is in terms of percentage is quite tremendous. You see here that Biden and Trump had really toughed it out, but for a significant period of time, we saw that Trump had maintained a lead ever since May 1st of 2024, Donald Trump started to take the lead in national betting odds, and it never really narrowed from there. After the first presidential debate, Trump went from a 52% chance and Biden went from a 36% chance. Biden dropped to a 20% chance, at one point in time, a 19.7% chance at victory. And then it started to fluctuate between Biden and Harris. After the assassination attempt, Donald Trump's chance at victory went up to a whopping 66%, according to the betting odds. At that point in time, Republicans had declared Donald Trump unstoppable, that he was running a race that was against no candidate, that he was running practically unopposed, which obviously wasn't going to happen and wasn't going to be the reality we're working with, but that's the argument that Republicans were making, and it was landing. Everyone believed it. The pundits believed it. The polls started to see a shift. And while it certainly wasn't an unopposed campaign, it was a tremendous one for President Trump. And it showed him in the best position for victory that he has ever been in, 2016 and 2020 included, the best position for victory in the immediate aftermath of that assassination attempt. The RNC happened. He chose J.D. Vance. The betting odds did dip a little bit. But then when Kamala Harris came into the fray and she was officially announced as Joe Biden was going to endorse her, she was going to win the nomination, her chances skyrocketed. They continued to skyrocket. And now today, for the first time in this entire modern election, what we've seen from primary season to now, the summer until now, the Democrats have finally reclaimed their advantage on the national betting odds by 2.7%, the largest lead we have seen dating all the way back to September of 2023. Because at that point in time, that's when Donald Trump was really losing to Joe Biden. And a lot of that actually had to do with Republican candidates being in the fray. Because never once did the Democratic contenders, Joe Biden, anyone else, ever cross the 50% mark. The highest for Biden was 42% chance of victory. Today, according to the betting odds, Kamala Harris has a 51% chance. That matters. That is substantial. And so what we find here in this new Marquette University poll is nothing short of a feat of monumental proportions for the Kamala Harris campaign. It's a sign of tremendous good news for the campaign, especially now that they have Tim Walz on the ticket. It's very possible that as we get closer and closer to that first debate, closer and closer to the convention, which will take place in less than 2 weeks, Kamala Harris will go into that with a substantial amount in terms of margin. And then after the convention, in the same way we saw a convention bump for Donald Trump, an increased amount of support for Kamala Harris, and something that goes to show that her campaign is on track for a victory that is eerily or very similar to what we saw for Joe Biden back in 2020, because this A-plus poll tells us everything we need to know, and that Kamala Harris has fundamentally shaped this race in a far, far, far better position for Democrats than ever before. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist of my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.